Single millionaire dad sends daughter to wrong summer camp, only to find love he never expected. Before we continue, comment from where you are enjoying the story. Cheers. This can't be right, Alexander Morgan muttered as his Tesla rolled to a stop before a cluster of rustic wooden cabins. His GPS insisted they'd arrived at their destination, but instead of the luxury summer academy he'd paid $30,000 for, he was staring at what appeared to be some kind of wilderness survival camp. Children with dirt-smudged faces ran between trees, carrying sticks and shouting. A group by the lake was attempting to lash logs together into a makeshift raft. Not a heated pool or tennis court in sight. He glanced at Sophie, his 12-year-old daughter, expecting to see horror mirror his own. Instead, her eyes had widened with something that looked suspiciously like excitement. "Dad, is this a wilderness camp?" Sophie pressed her face against the window, a smile spreading across her face. "This is amazing." Alex checked his confirmation email again. "There's been a mistake. This isn't Lakeview Academy." But Sophie wasn't listening. She'd already unbuckled her seatbelt, her hand on the door handle. "Sophie, wait." But his words came too late. She was already out of the car, running toward a group of kids building a fire pit. Alex grabbed his phone. 0 bars. Perfect. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," Alex announced, pushing open the door to a small log cabin marked Office. His CEO voice automatically engaged, the one that made board members straighten in their chairs and competitors reconsider their positions. From behind the registration desk, a woman looked up. Mid-30s, with chestnut hair pulled into a loose ponytail and dirt on her cargo pants, she was nothing like the polished concierge staff Alex was used to dealing with. "You're speaking to her," she replied, setting down a clipboard filled with activity schedules. "There's been a mistake. I'm Alexander Morgan. My daughter Sophie was supposed to be enrolled at Lakeview Academy's elite summer program." The woman stood, extending her hand. "Madison Parker. I run Pinewood Wilderness Camp, and there's no mistake, Mr. Morgan. I have your registration right here." She turned her computer screen toward him, showing his electronic signature on Pinewood's registration form. "Impossible. My assistant handled this. I specifically requested the premium package at Lakeview." Madison shrugged. "Well, your assistant signed her up for 2 weeks of survival skills, orienteering, and character building instead. No refunds after the start date." Alex pulled out his phone again, frantically trying to get a signal. "I need to call my office. Where's your Wi-Fi?" "We have limited satellite internet for emergencies. And this," Madison gestured at his frustration, "doesn't qualify. We're pretty big on disconnecting from technology here." "You don't understand. I'm the CEO of Morgan Innovations. I have a company to run." Madison didn't look impressed. "And I have 48 kids to keep alive in the wilderness. We all have responsibilities." Through the window, Alex could see Sophie already integrated into a group activity, her face animated as she helped build something with sticks and rope. "I'm taking my daughter and leaving," Alex stated firmly. Madison handed him a document. "Camp policy. Once a child is registered, they must complete the full session unless there's a medical emergency. It's for their psychological well-being. Builds resilience." Alex scanned the page, his jaw clenching as he read the policy he'd apparently agreed to. "This is absurd. I'll call my lawyer." "With what signal?" Madison smiled. "Look, Mr. Morgan, why not give it a day? Sophie seems to be enjoying herself already." As if on cue, Sophie's laughter floated through the open window, a sound Alex realized he hadn't heard in months. "I have meetings, conference calls, a merger in progress. We have a parent cabin. You're welcome to stay, or there's a motel about 40 minutes away, though the road gets pretty treacherous after dark." Alex felt trapped. He glanced out at Sophie again, now helping to start a fire with a flint. "Fine, one night, then we're discussing exceptions to your policy." Madison handed him a key. "Cabin 7. There's an orientation for new parents in 20 minutes. I recommend changing those shoes." She glanced down at his Italian leather loafers, already gathering dust. Back outside, Alex approached Sophie, who was now wearing a Pinewood Wilderness Camp t-shirt someone had given her. "Sophie, there's been a mix-up." "Isn't it great?" She beamed, not letting him finish. "Emmy says we're going to learn how to identify edible plants tomorrow, and there's a rock climbing wall. Don't get too excited, we're not staying." Sophie's smile faltered. "What? Why not?" "Because this isn't what we planned. This isn't what I paid for." "But I love it here already. Please, Dad, just give it a chance." Alex was taken aback by the intensity in her eyes. When had his quiet, compliant daughter developed such conviction? "I have work, Sophie. Important work." "You always have important work," she said quietly. "Mom would have loved this place." The mention of Catherine hit him like a physical blow. 3 years since the cancer took her, and still, her absence colored everything. "One night," he conceded. "We'll discuss it tomorrow." Sophie hugged him impulsively, then ran back to her new friends without a backward glance. Alex watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of pride and loss. He turned to find Madison observing him from the office porch. "Parent orientation is that way," she pointed, a knowing look in her eyes. First lesson: letting go. Alex's phone buzzed with an incoming email. The Jenkins merger was having complications. The board wanted an emergency meeting. His assistant had booked the wrong damned camp, and now he was stranded in the wilderness with no cell service, his daughter suddenly developing independence, and a frustratingly calm camp director who seemed to think she had all the answers. 2 weeks. He just had to survive 2 weeks. The parent orientation was worse than Alex's most uncomfortable board meeting. He sat on a log bench among a dozen other adults, mostly dressed in practical outdoor gear, all enthusiastically nodding as Madison explained the camp philosophy. "At Pinewood, we believe in transformative experiences," she was saying. "Your children will learn self-reliance, teamwork, and connection with nature. They'll leave here stronger, more confident, and with a deeper understanding of themselves." A father in hiking boots raised his hand. "My son has trouble making friends. Will there be structured social opportunities?" Madison nodded. "Every activity is designed to build community. No child stays isolated for long." Alex checked his watch. He'd found a weak signal near a specific pine tree and needed to make some calls before dark. "Mr. Morgan," Madison called, noticing his distraction. "Perhaps you'd like to share what you hope Sophie will gain from her Pinewood experience." All eyes turned to him. Alex straightened, his business instincts kicking in. "I imagine she'll appreciate her comfortable life more after this." A few parents exchanged glances. Madison's smile tightened. "Well, that's one perspective," she said, "though most children leave here wishing they could stay longer." "Because Stockholm Syndrome sets in," Alex muttered, just loud enough for the parents nearby to hear. A mother in flannel stifled a laugh. Madison continued, "Tomorrow morning, we have our first parent-child activity, the trust hike. Be at the main clearing at 7 a.m. sharp. Wear sturdy shoes." Her eyes lingered on Alex. As the orientation broke up, Alex hurried to his signal tree and dialed his assistant. "Rachel, we need to fix this immediately. Call the board and reschedule. Then contact Lakeview Academy and see if they still have space. Then get my lawyers to review this ridiculous camp contract." "Mr. Morgan?" It was Madison, approaching with a plate of food. "Dinner. The satellite phone is for emergencies only." Alex covered the mouthpiece. "This is an emergency. My company—" "Your company will survive 24 hours without you." She held out the plate. "Your body, however, needs food." "Rachel, I'll call back," Alex sighed, ending the call. He accepted the plate reluctantly, some kind of stew that smelled surprisingly good. "Where's Sophie dining?" "With her personal chef." His sarcasm didn't seem to affect Madison. "She's eating with her cabin mates, learning to exist without Daddy swooping in to fix everything." Alex scowled. "You don't know anything about our relationship?" "I know she lit up like a sparkler when she realized this wasn't a luxury camp." Alex took a bite of stew rather than respond. It was delicious. Wild mushroom and herb, Madison supplied. Locally foraged. We teach the kids which ones are safe. Charming. Do you also teach them which stocks to invest in when they're foraging for retirement funds? Madison laughed, surprising him. It was a genuine sound, warm and uninhibited. You're one of those. One of what? Parents who think success only comes in dollars and prestigious college acceptances. Alex stiffened. Catherine and I— He stopped himself. Why was he about to explain his parenting philosophy to this woman in hiking boots? Madison's expression softened at the mention of a name. Sophie's mother. Alex nodded curtly, focusing on his food. I lost my father young, Madison said after a moment. He was building something big, always busy. Then he was gone. Alex set down his fork. I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not neglecting Sophie. Aren't you? Madison's voice was gentle but direct. When was the last time you saw her laugh like she did today? Before Alex could answer, a counselor rushed up. Maddie, we need you at the dock. 2 kids tipped their canoe during evening lessons. Madison was instantly alert. Anyone hurt? Everyone's okay, just wet and scared. She nodded, turning back to Alex. Try to get some sleep. 7 a.m. comes early. Alex watched her jog toward the lake, efficient and purposeful. He hated admitting it, but there was something impressive about her confidence in this environment. He finished his dinner alone, then checked on Sophie. She was in a circle of girls, teaching them some complicated hand-clapping game. She saw him watching and waved, but didn't call him over. The parent cabin was basic but clean. A simple bed, wooden dresser, small bathroom, no TV, no minibar, not even decent lighting. Alex lay down, trying to formulate a plan. He needed to get back to work, but he couldn't just abandon Sophie, and the look on her face when she thought they might leave. He woke to the sound of a bell. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then reality flooded back. He was at a wilderness camp where he didn't belong. His phone showed 6:45 a.m. and a single bar of service. Alex dressed quickly, dialing Rachel while brushing his teeth. Cancel my meetings through Wednesday. Tell Jenkins we'll resume talks next week, and get me the best family lawyer in. The call dropped. Alex cursed, shoved his phone in his pocket, and headed toward the main clearing. Sophie was already there, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Dad, we're going to be partners for the trust hike. Isn't that awesome? Great, Alex managed. She was wearing borrowed hiking boots and had her hair in a braid he hadn't seen before. Madison stood at the center of the gathering, explaining the activity. Each pair will have 1 blindfolded member and 1 guide. You'll navigate a trail together, relying completely on verbal communication and trust. Halfway through, you'll switch roles. She began distributing blindfolds. Children will be guided first. Parents, your job is to keep them safe while letting them experience the challenge. When she reached Alex, she paused. First time hiking, Mr. Morgan? He bristled. I've hiked. Business retreats in Aspen. Madison handed him the blindfold, leaning closer. This isn't a groomed resort trail. It's raw nature. Sophie's safety depends on you paying attention. Her proximity was disconcerting. He noticed her eyes were a striking mix of green and gold, like sunlight through forest leaves. I can handle it, he said, more confidently than he felt. Madison nodded, then addressed the group. Some trails are narrow with drop-offs. Never rush your partner. Communication is key. They set off in staggered pairs. Sophie put on her blindfold, grinning nervously. Don't worry, Alex said, taking her hand. I won't let anything happen to you. The first 10 minutes went smoothly. The trail was wide and obvious, with Sophie giggling as Alex guided her around obstacles. But soon the path narrowed, winding alongside a steep slope that dropped to a creek below. Step higher here, Alex instructed, his hand firm on Sophie's elbow. There's a root. How high? Sophie asked, lifting her foot tentatively. Alex realized he needed to be more specific. About 6 inches, then a big step down. Sophie followed his directions carefully. They developed a rhythm, a vocabulary of precise instructions. Alex found himself noticing details he would normally miss. The texture of bark on a tree he guided her to touch, the sound of wildlife he described to help orient her. "You're doing great, Soph," he said, surprising himself with the nickname he hadn't used since she was small. She smiled beneath her blindfold. "So are you, Dad." At the halfway point, they switched roles. Alex felt ridiculous putting on the blindfold, but Sophie was eager to lead. "Okay, Dad. Small step up. There's a log across the path. Lift your right foot higher. Perfect." Her voice was clear, confident. When had his little girl become so capable? Without sight, Alex's other senses heightened. The forest came alive around him. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the earthy scent of soil and pine. He felt strangely vulnerable yet connected, trusting Sophie completely. "Stop!" Sophie's voice was suddenly urgent. Alex froze. "What is it?" "There's a really steep part ahead. Miss Parker is helping the pair in front of us. She says to wait." Alex stood still, listening to Sophie chat with Madison, explaining proudly how well they were doing. Then he felt a different hand on his arm, larger, steadier. "The next section is tricky," Madison said, her voice closer than he expected. "Sophie will guide, but I'll be right here too." Alex was acutely aware of Madison's hand on his arm, steady and warm through his sleeve. She guided him and Sophie through the difficult section of trail, her voice calm and assured. "Now, we're past the tricky part," Madison announced. "Sophie, you're in charge again." As Madison's touch disappeared, Alex felt an odd sense of loss. The rest of the hike passed without incident, with Sophie growing more confident in her guidance. When they finally reached the end, Alex removed his blindfold, blinking in the sunlight. The world seemed sharper somehow, more vivid. "We did it!" Sophie high-fived him enthusiastically. "We were like the best team ever." "You were an excellent guide," Alex admitted, surprised by how much he'd enjoyed the experience. Madison approached, clipboard in hand. "You two worked well together. How did it feel to trust someone else, Mr. Morgan?" "Unsettling," he answered honestly, "but educational." She smiled, making a note. "That's the point. Now, lunch is in 30 minutes. After that, the kids have lake activities while parents have free time." "Perfect." Alex pulled out his phone. "I can finally make some calls." Madison frowned. "Or you could join our parent workshop on mindful presence." "I'll pass." He turned to Sophie. "Have fun swimming. I'll see you at dinner." Sophie's smile dimmed slightly, but she nodded. "Okay, I'm going to learn kayaking." As Sophie ran off with her new friends, Madison lingered. 2 weeks pass quickly. These moments don't come back." "Neither do billion-dollar opportunities," Alex replied, already scrolling through emails. Madison sighed. "The Parents' Lounge has the strongest signal, if you need it." For the next few hours, Alex immersed himself in work. The Jenkins merger was indeed in trouble. A competitor was making a play for the same technology. His CFO was panicking about quarterly projections. This was his world. High stakes, fast decisions, concrete problems with definable solutions. Yet he found himself glancing out the window toward the lake more often than he cared to admit. He could see Sophie in a bright orange life vest, laughing as a counselor showed her how to paddle. Madison moved between activity stations, equally at ease teaching archery or helping a homesick child. By evening, Alex had salvaged the most critical aspects of his work situation, though Rachel made it clear that his physical presence would soon be necessary. He headed to the dining hall, where families gathered for dinner. Sophie waved him over to a table she shared with other girls her age. "Dad, I learned to roll a kayak today, and Emma taught me how to identify poison ivy, and we saw a deer at the edge of the forest." Her enthusiasm was contagious. "Sounds like a big day." "The biggest! Tomorrow we're learning orienteering. Miss Parker says I have a natural sense of direction like Mom did." Alex froze. "She mentioned your mother." Sophie nodded, scooping up mashed potatoes. "I told her Mom was good at finding her way anywhere, Remember how she never used GPS? He did remember. Catherine navigating backroads by intuition alone, claiming technology dulled natural instincts. It was a detail about his late wife he'd almost forgotten. After dinner, there was a campfire. Alex intended to retreat to his cabin for more work, but Sophie grabbed his hand. "You have to come. Everyone's going to tell stories." He found himself sitting on a log bench, Sophie leaning against him as darkness fell. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling upward to mingle with emerging stars. Children and parents roasted marshmallows while counselors led songs. Madison sat across the fire, the flames illuminating her face. She was good with the children, patient and engaged as they competed to tell the most outrageous stories. When Sophie volunteered to share, Alex tensed. She rarely spoke up in groups. "My mom used to say that stars are windows to heaven," Sophie began, her voice small but steady. "When someone special dies, they get to pick a star to watch over you from—" The circle grew quiet. Alex's throat tightened. "When I miss her, I find the brightest star and imagine she's looking through it." Sophie looked up at the sparkling sky. "I think she'd like it here." Madison's eyes met Alex's across the fire. There was no judgment there, only a gentle understanding that made him look away first. Later, as families dispersed to their cabins, Madison approached. "Sophie's remarkable." "Yes," Alex agreed. "She's been through a lot." "So have you, I imagine." Alex didn't respond immediately. They walked in silence toward the cabins. "We had it all planned out," he finally said. "Catherine was the heart, I was the drive. Together, we'd give Sophie the perfect life. Then suddenly I was alone, responsible for everything." Madison nodded. "It's not easy, carrying both roles." "I've tried to give Sophie everything Catherine would have wanted for her." "And what would Catherine have wanted?" Alex stopped walking. No one had asked him that before. Everyone had just assumed, as he had, that success and security were the priorities. "She would have wanted Sophie to be happy," he said slowly, "to be brave and kind and to live fully." "Like she's doing here," Madison suggested gently. Before Alex could answer, a counselor called Madison away to handle a situation. Alex continued to his cabin alone, thinking about Catherine, about Sophie, and about the determined woman who was making him question his carefully constructed life. The next morning, his phone rang at dawn. It was his CFO. "Alex, Jenkins is threatening to walk. They need you in New York by tomorrow, or the deal is dead." He glanced out the window. Sophie was already up, joining a group for early morning yoga on the main lawn. She looked so peaceful, so at home here. "Book me on a flight," he decided. "I'll be there." He found Madison in the dining hall preparing for breakfast. "I need to leave for a few days. Business emergency." She frowned. "The point of camp is consistency, Mr. Morgan. Your coming and going will disrupt Sophie's experience." "This is non-negotiable. Millions are at stake." "And what about what Sophie needs?" "Sophie needs a father who can provide for her future," Alex insisted. "I'll be back as soon as possible." Madison crossed her arms. "You'll break her heart." "She'll understand. She always does." "That's what worries me," Madison said softly. Alex found Sophie at breakfast. "Hey, kiddo, I need to talk to you." Her smile faded as he explained. "But you promised we'd do the overnight campout together," she said. "I know, and I'm sorry. This is a critical deal." "They're always critical," Sophie said, her voice flat. "I'll be back in 3 days, 4 at most." Sophie looked down at her cereal. "Fine, whatever." "Sophie." "It's okay, Dad. I get it. Work comes first." She stood up. "I have to go. We're making dream catchers this morning." She walked away, her shoulders stiff, not looking back. Alex felt a familiar guilt, the one he usually buried under justifications about securing her future. Madison was waiting when he returned to his cabin to pack. "Sophie told me you're leaving." "Just for a few days." "You know the parents' overnight campout is tonight. It's kind of a big deal to the kids." Alex zipped his bag with more force than necessary. "Look, I don't need you to make me feel worse than I already do." "Then don't go," Madison challenged. "Show Sophie that she matters more than work." "It's not that simple." "It never is for people like you." Alex turned, irritated. "People like me." People who hide from messy emotions in spreadsheets and meetings. People who think protecting means controlling. "You don't know me," Alex said coldly. "I know you're running away when things get real here," Madison replied. "I've seen it 100 times with parents. The moment they start connecting with their kids, really connecting, they find an excuse to leave." Her words hit too close to home. "I'm doing what's necessary." "Keep telling yourself that." Madison headed for the door, then paused. "There's a satellite phone in my office for emergencies. I'll tell Sophie she can call you tonight." After she left, Alex sat heavily on the bed. He was making the right choice, wasn't he? The Jenkins deal would secure funding for Sophie's college, maybe even beyond. That was what responsible parents did. So why did he feel like he was failing at something far more important? The New York office of Morgan Innovations occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower. Alex strode through the open workspace, employees nodding respectfully as he passed. This was his domain, where his word was law and problems had clear solutions. "The Jenkins team is waiting in the main conference room," Rachel said, falling into step beside him. "Legal has reviewed the revised terms." Alex nodded, mentally shifting into CEO mode. For the next 8 hours he negotiated, persuaded, and finally secured the deal that would expand Morgan Innovations into European markets. The board was ecstatic. The financial press would report it as a masterful business move. It was nearly midnight when he returned to his penthouse apartment. The space felt strangely hollow, its sleek minimalist design suddenly stark rather than sophisticated. He poured himself a drink and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. His phone had one text message from the camp's number. "Sophie says goodnight. She earned her fire-starting badge today." No call, no details about the campout he was missing, just that brief update. Alex typed several responses, deleted them all, then finally sent. "Tell her I'm proud. Deal is done. Back tomorrow." Sleep eluded him. In the dark quiet of his bedroom, images from camp kept surfacing. Sophie's face as she guided him on the trust hike, her excitement over kayaking, her small voice talking about stars and her mother. And, unexpectedly, Madison's challenging gaze across the campfire. The next morning, another crisis demanded attention. A key developer was threatening to leave. Then the PR team needed approval on press releases for the Jenkins deal. One urgent task after another filled his day. "I need to get back to the camp tomorrow," he told Rachel that evening. "Book me on the earliest flight." "About that," Rachel said cautiously, "the quarterly board presentation is scheduled for tomorrow. Smithfield specifically asked for you to walk them through the Jenkins integration plan." Alex hesitated. "Reschedule it?" Rachel's eyes widened. "But they've all confirmed. This is the presentation you've been preparing for weeks." "I made a promise to Sophie. The board won't be happy. They'll survive." Alex found himself using Madison's words from days earlier. "Send them the presentation deck. I'll call in for questions." The next morning, as his private car climbed the winding mountain road toward Pinewood, Alex felt an unexpected tension. How would Sophie receive him? Would she be angry? Indifferent? Had 3 days away undone the connection they'd begun to build? The camp came into view, looking different somehow. What had seemed primitive now appeared purposeful. What had felt chaotic now seemed vibrant. He spotted Madison immediately, directing a group building something near the lake. She saw him, too. Even from a distance, her expression was cool. "Where's Sophie?" he asked, approaching her. "Advanced trail hike. They'll be back this afternoon." Madison turned back to her clipboard without further acknowledgement. "I got here as soon as I could. The Jenkins deal—" "I'm sure it was very important," she interrupted. Sophie understood. She always does. Her tone made him bristle. I don't need your approval of my parenting choices. Madison finally looked at him directly. No, you don't. But Sophie needs a father who shows up. I did show up. I'm here now. After missing the campout she talked about all week. Alex felt defensive heat rising. I provide for her. I ensure her future. That matters too. Of course it does. Madison's voice softened slightly. But she needs both. Presence and provision. Security and connection. Before Alex could respond, she handed him a folded paper. She made this in craft time yesterday. It was a handmade card. On the front, Sophie had drawn their home in Manhattan, and beside it, a rough sketch of the camp. Inside, her childish handwriting read, I wish these two places could be together, like you and Mom used to be. Something cracked in Alex's chest. I didn't realize that she still needs her dad? Even a dad who wears fancy shoes and doesn't know how to build a fire? Madison's smile took the sting from her words. Children are remarkably forgiving. It's not too late. Alex carefully folded the card. When will they be back from the hike? Around 4, just in time for the camp challenge. Camp challenge. For the first time since his return, Madison's expression brightened. Teams of parents and kids competing in wilderness skills, building shelters, starting fires, finding food, that sort of thing. Sounds primitive. It's actually incredibly high-tech, Madison deadpanned. We use state-of-the-art sticks and rocks. Despite himself, Alex laughed. I deserved that. Yes, you did. She checked her watch. If you want to join in, you'd better change. Those Italian loafers won't survive the mud pit. There's a mud pit? Oh, yes. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. And it's mandatory. When Sophie returned from her hike, Alex was waiting in borrowed boots and camp clothes. Her initial caution dissolved into a tight hug that lasted longer than usual. You came back, she whispered against his chest. I promised I would. But what about your super important deal? It's done, and I handled the board meeting remotely. He pulled back to look at her dirt-smudged face. Nothing was more important than getting back to you. Sophie's smile was worth every uncomfortable board question, every executive grumble. Did Miss Parker tell you about the challenge? We're going to win. Alex glanced over at Madison, who was organizing teams. I don't know about winning. I'm not exactly an outdoorsman. I'll help you, Sophie assured him. I've learned tons of stuff. The challenge began at the mud pit, where parents and children had to cross together without letting go of their joined hands. Most teams strategized carefully. Sophie simply pulled Alex forward with a wild whoop, plunging them both into the sticky mud. Sophie, Alex gasped, feeling the cold muck seep into places he'd rather not think about. She emerged, mud-covered and laughing. Isn't it awesome? Like the mud baths at that spa you took me to, except way more fun. Seeing her joy, Alex couldn't maintain his disgust. Something shifted inside him, a willingness to be ridiculous, to be messy. He scooped up a handful of mud and dabbed it on her nose. You missed a spot. Sophie's eyes widened in shock before she retaliated, and soon they were laughing too hard to continue the challenge properly. They finished dead last in the mud pit portion, but Alex couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed so freely. The shelter building section went better, with Sophie applying knots she'd learned and Alex contributing structural engineering principles. Their lean-to wasn't beautiful, but it was solid. Where did you learn to tie knots like that? Alex asked, genuinely impressed. Ms. Parker taught me. She says knots are like coding, logical patterns that solve problems. Alex looked over at Madison, who was helping another team. She must have felt his gaze because she looked up, offering a small smile of encouragement. The fire-starting challenge was their moment of truth. Sophie demonstrated the technique with confidence, but their tinder wouldn't catch. Let me try, Alex said, taking the flint. His first attempts were clumsy, but he remembered watching Madison's demonstration days earlier. The motion, the angle, the patience. A spark caught. Then another. Sophie gently blew on the nascent flame until it strengthened. "We did it!" she exclaimed, high-fiving him as their small fire crackled to life. They didn't win the overall challenge, but they finished respectably in the middle of the pack. As teams dispersed for dinner, Madison approached them. "Nice teamwork out there." "Sophie's a good teacher," Alex admitted. "And Dad didn't even complain about the mud," Sophie added proudly. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Growth mindset. I'm impressed." "Don't be too impressed. I'm still planning the longest hot shower in recorded history." Madison laughed. "Join the cooking class first? Sophie mentioned you two don't cook much at home." "That's an understatement," Sophie giggled. "Dad burns water." "I order excellent takeout," Alex defended himself. "Tonight we're making foil packet meals over the coals," Madison said. "Foolproof, even for beginners." Alex found himself agreeing, and soon they were chopping vegetables and wrapping them with seasoned chicken in foil packets. Madison moved between groups, but she stopped often at their station, offering tips and casual conversation. Under her guidance, Alex and Sophie created something not just edible, but delicious. As they sat together enjoying their creation, Alex felt an unfamiliar contentment. No urgent emails, no crisis calls, just this moment, this meal, this remarkable child who somehow still wanted his company despite his many absences. The remaining days at camp passed in a blur of activities and discoveries. Alex canceled his return to New York, delegating the post-merger work to his executive team. For the first time in years, he was fully present, engaged in each moment rather than mentally processing the next business challenge. He learned to identify edible plants, to read weather patterns, to navigate by stars. But more importantly, he learned about Sophie, her natural leadership with younger campers, her artistic talent in crafting sessions, her courage on the high ropes course. He watched her bloom in this environment, free from the pressures and schedules that had structured her life in Manhattan. On their final night, Madison organized a special sunset hike for parents and children. At the summit, they watched as the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Look, Dad." Sophie pointed to the first star appearing in the twilight. "Do you think Mom is watching?" Alex put his arm around her shoulders. "I know she is, and she's so proud of you." "Of both of us," Sophie corrected, leaning against him. As darkness fell, families began the descent back to camp. Alex lingered, noticing Madison standing alone, gazing at the horizon. "Thank you," he said, approaching her, "for everything." She turned, her profile silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Just doing my job." "No, it was more than that. You challenged me, made me uncomfortable. I needed that." Madison smiled. "Most growth happens outside our comfort zones." "So, I've discovered." He paused. "Sophie and I are staying an extra day in the area. There's a small lodge by the lake. I thought, maybe, you might join us for dinner tomorrow, after camp ends?" Madison looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I'd like that." The next afternoon, as Alex loaded their bags into the car, Sophie hugged Madison goodbye. "Will you be here next summer?" Sophie asked. "Dad already promised we can come back." Madison glanced at Alex with raised eyebrows. "He did?" Alex nodded. 2 weeks, already on my calendar. Nothing will interfere." "Then I'll definitely be here," Madison promised Sophie. That evening, seated at a rustic restaurant overlooking the lake, Alex watched as Madison and Sophie discussed plans for an autumn hiking trip. There was an ease between them, a natural connection. "What will you do after camp season ends?" he asked Madison when Sophie went to examine the dessert display. "Environmental education programs at schools, weekend wilderness courses, writing my outdoor curriculum book." She shrugged. "It keeps me busy." "Ever make it to New York?" "Occasionally, for conferences or fundraising." Her eyes met his. "Why do you ask?" "No reason." Alex smiled. Except Sophie would love to show you her favorite museum. And I know a decent coffee place." Madison laughed. "Just decent? Well, their premium roast is acceptable. High praise from you." She tilted her head. "I might be there in October. We'll keep our calendar open." When Sophie returned, she looked between them with knowing eyes beyond her years. "Are you two having a grown-up moment?" "Just planning ahead," Alex said. 6 months later, Alex stood in his Manhattan office, gazing at the city skyline. On his desk sat a new photograph, Sophie and Alex beside a campfire, both muddy and laughing. Beside it was a framed leaf pressing Sophie had made, and a small carved wooden star Madison had sent for Sophie's birthday. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Morgan, your 4 o'clock is here." "Thanks, Rachel, and remember, I'm leaving early today. Sophie's science presentation is at 5:30. Already noted, nothing scheduled after 5 p.m. on presentation days, recital days, or game days. It's a permanent calendar rule." Alex smiled, tucking his phone into his pocket as he headed to his meeting. There was a new notification, a message from Madison with a photo of a mountain trail and the caption, "For our weekend hike. Sophie will love it." He replied quickly, "Not if I fall off the cliff first, still clumsy in hiking boots." Her response came seconds later. "I'll catch you. Always do." Alex entered the conference room still smiling, carrying with him the balance he'd finally found: success with meaning, achievement with connection, and a heart open to unexpected love. For now, that was enough. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of love to break down walls and bridge any divide. Please do comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of family, redemption, and the triumph of love over pride. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.